Translated from Greek, bulimia means bull hunger. This word most accurately reflects the essence of this disease, which is characterized by uncontrolled, rapid absorption of food. A person swallows products one by one and does not feel satiation. He or she only stops when the stomach starts to hurt from agitation. The bulimic may also be interrupted if another person enters the room, or if there is a sudden phone call that must be answered, but he or she still does not feel satisfied. Other names for bulimia are wolf hunger and dog appetite. The official name is bulimia nervosa. The term was coined by the British psychiatrist Gerald Russell in 1979. The first detailed description of bulimia nervosa as an independent disease also belongs to him. Before Russell, bulimia was thought of as just one of the manifestations of anorexia nervosa, and perhaps it would have remained that way had it not been for this young man, who comes from a family of diplomats with a strong passion for psychiatry. Gerald Russell gained qualification as a doctor at the University of Edinburgh and took a job at London's Maudsley Hospital. Sometimes our life is determined by things that we did not plan and that we had not previously thought of. Amazing accidents and unusual acquaintances. This is about Dr. Russell. At Maudsley Hospital, he met the psychiatrist Aubrey Lewis. Dr. Lewis would later be cited as the driving force behind the rampant rise of British psychiatry. He also acted as a driving force with Russell. Gerald Russell was so impressed by meeting a talented doctor that he also decided to become a psychiatrist. His career was fast and successful. From 1971 to 1979, Russell had been professor of psychiatry at the Royal Free Hospital in London. During these years, he dealt with numerous cases of eating disorders among patients. Observing them gave Russell a chance to notice a separate category of patients who ate nonstop and then either took a laxative or induced vomiting to get rid of what they had eaten. These patients were very different from the women and men with anorexia nervosa with whom Gerald Russell already had extensive experience. Anorexic patients were emaciated and thin. They avoided food and exhausted themselves. But the patients Russell turned his attention to did not meet the diagnostic criteria for anorexia nervosa. First, their weight in most cases was normal. Secondly, they, on the contrary, sought to eat as much food as possible in a short period of time. In 1979, Russell published an article titled Bulimia Nervosa, an ominous variant of anorexia nervosa, in Psychological Medicine magazine. In the article, the psychiatrist described 30 clinical cases, 28 women and 2 men. All these people were overly worried about their weight and sought to get rid of the excessive calories that they consumed daily as quickly as possible. One of the patients got also down to an intensive jog. Each of these people had a strong feeling of shame coming over them after each food orgy and the subsequent emptying of the stomach or intestines. They understood the negative and destructive consequences of such behavior, but they couldn't stop. One of Russell's patients explained her behavior as follows: "I'm surrounded by loneliness and emptiness, which can usually be alleviated only with food." After each overeating, the woman felt strong disgust towards herself and immediately swallowed up to 20 laxative tablets. Another patient could eat about 3 kilograms of various foods in one go. For example, half the bread, a large number of cakes and yogurts. After that, she stuck a toothbrush handle down her throat to induce vomiting. This cycle could be repeated up to 4 times a day. Gerald Russell quickly realized that this behavior, although related to eating disorders, had little in common with anorexia nervosa. He continued to study it until he could finally confirm the independent nature of the disease. It was thanks to Russell that bulimia nervosa was recognized as a separate mental disease. One of the manifestations of bulimia nervosa even got its name in honor of the psychiatrist who discovered the disease. What is meant here are calluses on the joints and the knuckles of the hand, which arise from the constant contact of the hand with the incisors. Several times a day, a person with bulimia sticks his or her hand into the mouth to reach the back of his or her throat with fingers and induce a gag reflex, and every time his or her teeth rest in the same place on the back of his or her hand. This manifestation is called Russell's sign, and although it indicates an eating disorder, its presence is not a prerequisite for determining the disease. The fact is that some patients induce vomiting with the help of various objects, or even know how to get rid of the contents of their stomach by contracting the abdominal muscles. To date, according to the U.S. National Eating Disorders Association, 1% of women and 0.1% of men suffer from bulimia. The average age of patients at the time of diagnosis is usually 15 to 20 years. However, bulimia is not just a disease for young people. According to a study that took into account data from 5.7 thousand British women aged 40 to 50 years, 0.4% suffered from bulimia in this age group. Bulimia has been included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, which is developed and published by the American Psychiatric Association. According to the DSM diagnostic criteria, episodes of binge eating and subsequent compensatory behavior in bulimia occur at least once a week for at least 3 months. Compensatory behavior is the desire to get rid of the calories eaten as quickly as possible in order to avoid possible weight gain. In 9 out of 10 cases, this is laxative abuse or forced vomiting. Although some patients also resort to other methods, excessive physical exertion, fasting, taking diuretics. People with bulimia have a strong fear of gaining weight. At the same time, they usually fail to achieve their goal, a thin and slender figure. Bulimia patients are usually either overweight or within normal limits. According to a Norwegian scientist study conducted in 2018, 5.8% of patients suffering from bulimia were underweight. 61.2% had normal weight, 28.2% were overweight, and 4.9% of patients were even obese. In the short period of time that the bout of overeating lasts, people with bulimia eat tens of thousands of calories, totally out of control. Despite the compensatory behavior, some of these calories are still digested. Due to the normal or even excessive weight of a bulimic, his or her family and friends may not even know that the person has such a problem as bulimia. After all, eating disorders are most often associated with anorexia and, accordingly, leanness. Moreover, because of the strong sense of shame, patients do everything possible to hide their problems. Overeating attacks occur when the patient is alone and no one has the opportunity to watch him. You can guess about the disease only by chance. For example, finding a large number of packages of sweets under the bed. The habit of immediately going to the restroom after eating can also raise a red flag. It is important to distinguish bulimia from other eating disorders also listed in the DSM. People suffering from anorexia nervosa sometimes also get into a binge purge cycle, but they tend to eat very little and their body weight is critically low. There is also a binge eating disorder. This is a kind of bulimia without the purification stage. In a short period of time, a person eats a lot of food, but does not resort to compensatory behavior. Such patients are usually obese. In June 1992, a biography by Andrew Morton, Diana, Her True Story, was published. In his book, the biographer wrote that Diana, Princess of Wales, was deeply unhappy for most of her married life. She attempted suicide several times and had bulimia nervosa. According to Morton, bulimia began shortly after Diana's marriage to Prince Charles in 1981. The reason for this was the comments of the prince regarding the girl's imperfect waist. Diana admitted that although she did not personally communicate with Morton, she allowed her close friends to have a talk with the biographer. The princess was also interviewed by a friend who recorded their conversations, having provided them to Morton later. Therefore, all information about the presence of bulimia nervosa in the princess is fact-based. Later on, in an interview with BBC One's Panorama in 1995, the Princess of Wales admitted that she really suffered from bulimia nervosa. "I had bulimia for a number of years, and that's like a secret disease. you inflict it upon yourself because your self-esteem is at a low ebb. You fill your stomach up 4 or 5 times a day, and it gives you a feeling of comfort. But it's temporary. Then you're disgusted at the bloatedness of your stomach, the princess told the host, Martin Bashir. She also described the breakdown as a symptom of what was going on in her marriage to Prince Charles. After a while, the Princess of Wales announced that she was cured, although the former butler of Princess Diana, Paul Burrell, admitted that she never got rid of the disorder. On True Royalty TV's The Royal Beat, Burrell said that Diana's mental disorder made Diana feel somewhat comfortable. Bulimia did not leave her until the last second. She died with this disease, but Diana never aspired to defeat it because for her, to some extent, bulimia became an aspect of life control. Paul believes the unhealthy habit stayed with Princess Diana until the day she died in 1997. People with bulimia are more likely to have affective disorders such as depression or general anxiety disorder than people without it. According to research data, 70% of patients with bulimia have suffered from depression at some point in their lives. Another study by the Royal Melbourne Children's Hospital found that adolescents with bulimia nervosa had a 6-fold increase in the risk of anxiety and a doubling in the risk of substance abuse. Bulimia is more common among those who have a close relative with the condition. The percentage of risk that is associated with genetics ranges from 30% to 80%. Among other risk factors for the disease are psychological stress, cultural pressure to achieve a certain body type, low self-esteem, and obesity. Living in a culture that encourages dieting and having parents who worry about weight also pose risks. Although we take bulimia as a disease of modern society, which appeared against the background of the cult of slimness, this is actually not entirely true. The history of bulimia is much longer. The first mention of bulimia is found in the work of the ancient Greek writer, historian, commander, and politician Xenophon. This warrior and thinker, who believed in the direct actions of the gods in human affairs, left numerous historical and biographical works to his descendants. The most famous among them is Anabasis. In this work, written in 370 BC, Xenophon described the campaign of an 11,000th Greek army in Asia Minor and its subsequent retreat after the Battle of Cunaxa. The commander estimates the number of enemy troops at 1.2 million, not counting the chariots. The Greek soldiers who survived the collision, under the command of Xenophon himself, then retreated to the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. The whole trip took them a year and 3 months. The work Anabasis, also known as the March of 10,000, describes the experience of the formation of the Greek army, the relationship between soldiers and command. It also gives a detailed description of the route and the numerous difficulties that befell the Greek mercenaries. In his work, Xenophon also describes episodes of inducing vomiting among Greek soldiers. According to the author, the minds of the warriors were clouded by the surrounding mountains of Asia Minor, as a result of which the Greeks devoured everything edible that they could find around. As a matter of fact, the reasons for the excessive consumption of food by the Greek warriors and then the cleansing procedures are not fully explained. But as for the Roman nobility, overeating and the subsequent cleansing of the stomach was akin to a social prescription among them. Luxurious patrician feasts make it into history not only because of the tables groaning with food, but also the practice of inducing vomit between meals. The purpose of this was to free the stomach for the next plentiful satiety. Some historians believe that there were special small rooms, vomitoriums, in the Roman halls for ceremonial receptions. Eaten and drunk guests could at any time go to such a room, get rid of what they had eaten, and return to a luxurious meal. In 1871, the French politician and journalist Félix Piat described the British Christmas meal as a crude pagan monstrous orgy, a Roman feast with no shortage of vomitoriums. In the same year, Augustus Harré, in his Walks in Rome, described a room adjoining the dining room in the Flavian Palace. He suggested that it was a vomitorium and called it an abominable monument to Roman life. As for the physicians of ancient Egypt, they went as far as recommending that their patients carry out forced cleansing of the stomach for 3 days once a month. They believed that the body is cleansed this way. The ancient Roman physician, surgeon, and philosopher of Greek origin, Galen, made an incredible contribution to the understanding of many scientific disciplines, including anatomy, physiology, pathology, pharmacology, and neurology. His theories dominated European medicine for 1,300 years. Galen's suggestion that the brain controls movement through the nervous system is still relevant today. It was Galen who lived in the 2nd century BC in the Roman Empire and took notice of such strange eating behavior. It was he who first introduced the term bulimus and described the following symptoms of the disease: uncontrolled absorption of food beyond measure, fainting, pallor, cold limbs, low pulse. At that time, the physician believed that the cause was a change in the acidity of the stomach. Saint Maria Maddalena de' Pazzi, who was born in 1566 in Florence, also suffered from bulimia. This Carmelite nun was highly respected in the convent of Santa Maria degli Angeli. In her theological reflections, she emphasized the idea of God being the universal love. She considered it an urgent need to cleanse and renew the Church, wrote letters with appropriate appeals to Pope Sixtus V and the cardinals. The life and mystical visions of Maria Maddalena have been studied by many historians, religious scholars, and psychiatrists. Among them is the Austrian and German psychiatrist Richard Friedlein Joseph Freer-Kraft von Festenberg auf Fromberg. Richard von Krafft-Ebing's most famous work is Psychopathia Sexualis, written in 1886. In this book, the doctor notes the particular inclination of Maria to experience religious ecstasy precisely at the moments of scourging. The greatest joy for her was when the abbess of the monastery ordered her hands to be tied behind her back and scourge her on her naked buttocks in front of all the nuns. However, this scourging that she practiced from early youth completely enervated her, and perhaps no scourged person had as many hallucinations as she did. The inner heat of love tormented her so much during these scenes that she continually exclaimed, "Enough! Do not kindle more than this flame that devours me. This is not the kind of death I want for myself. This one promises too much pleasure and bliss." In her pursuance for holiness, Maria Maddalena suppressed her natural instincts and needs. In the end, overly ignored, they nevertheless manifested themselves, multiplying 100-fold. Her attitude to food was no exception. Refusing food most of the time, sometimes she lost control of herself and began to consume it without restriction. Then she explained her gluttony with nothing more than the machinations of the devil. Many Victorian girls were also bulimic. Perhaps the reason was that they were supposed not to eat in the presence of strangers and to show all kinds of indifference to food. Representatives of bourgeois families ate after prolonged torture and suffered from bulimia, unable to withstand the torture of hunger. In the 19th century, Canadian physician William Osler spoke of bulimia nervosa as a disorder of satiety and hunger within neurotic conditions, in particular hysteria and asthenia. In general, many discoveries and important observations belong to Osler. His following quotation is widely known: "One of the main duties of a doctor is to teach people not to take medicine." In 1944, the Swiss psychiatrist Ludwig Binswanger published the story of one of his patients who suffered from bulimia nervosa. The girl's name was Ellen West. She was born into a Jewish family in 1888. In her youth, she was stubborn, rebellious, intelligent, and obsessive. She also had a strong anxiety that gradually spread from her inner self to the outer limits of her body. It was then that Ellen developed a fear of becoming fat. Ellen West was fond of writing poetry. In her works, she often expressed a strong craving for food, mixed with a fear of gaining weight. These thoughts eventually led to the development of depression. To stay thin, Ellen began taking laxatives. sometimes 60 to 70 packs a day. The girl's medical history is based on her diaries, poems, letters, and autobiographical notes. There is an image of food in all of them, as something desirable and oppressive at the same time. Ellen was constantly thinking about food. She tried to eat as little as possible, sometimes completely depriving herself of it. After that, long periods of fasting were suddenly interrupted by uncontrollable bouts of gluttony. Ellen could eat only in complete solitude and at the same time suffered from a constant sense of shame. The worst was after eating. All day long I feared the feeling would return, dull, empty feeling in my heart, a feeling of fear and helplessness. Ellen was always either hungry or afraid of hunger. The anxiety caused by it was sometimes worse than hunger itself. At 28, Ellen married her cousin. She was obsessed with the desire to have a baby, but bad eating habits resulted in a miscarriage. Ellen decided to stop taking laxatives in order to get pregnant, but her anxiety got the better of her, and she started taking them again. Over time, Ellen became so weak and unwell that she stopped menstruating. And only after 3 years of marriage, when Ellen was 31 years old and her weight was 41 kilograms, she told her husband about her critical condition and depression. In January 1921, Ellen was treated by Ludwig Binswanger, a young doctor at the private Swiss clinic Bellevue in Kreuzlingen on the shores of Lake Constance. It was an expensive clinic, with single rooms and the possibility for family members to live with patients. Lunches were held at the same table with doctors, and a comprehensive recovery program was provided for patients. Ellen's husband lived with her in the clinic. It would seem that such a balanced and expensive therapy should have yielded results. But in the end, Ellen only got worse. She was diagnosed with bulimia nervosa, melancholia, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and schizophrenia. With each day, Ellen thought about death more and more often and became literally obsessed with it over time. Ellen West's fears and anxieties made her accept death as her only option. For if she dies, she will be set free, and her worries will finally come to an end. In his book, psychiatrist Ludwig Binswanger explained that Ellen West perceived her life as a prison that one can escape only by dying. For West, her life seemed empty and dull, and filling her body with food only made her feel worse. Then Dr. Binswanger suggested that for Ellen, starvation was becoming a way to end her life. Over time, she began to demonstrate other behavioral patterns that could be regarded as suicidal. For example, she rode her horse as fast as possible, deliberately hugged and kissed children with scarlet fever, went out naked in the cold after taking a bath. On March 22, 1921, Ellen West made the last entry in her diary. "My disease appeared to me in all its nakedness. It is necessary to die." In the same days, her husband wrote in his diary, "Do I have the right to interfere with her?" The couple decided to say goodbye to Dr. Binswanger and leave the clinic. Easter has come. During the family dinner, Ellen West was sad and thoughtful. She hardly touched food. But on the third day, she suddenly changed. For some reason, she cheered up. During breakfast, she spread butter on her bread and added sugar to her coffee. At lunch, she ate to fullness for the first time in 13 years. After that, she even tasted pralines and Easter eggs made from chocolate and marzipans. Then Ellen went for a walk, read Rilke and Goethe a little, wrote a letter, drank her tea in the evening, and went to bed peacefully. In his letter to Dr. Binswanger, her husband would later write that he was aware of her last fateful act. Ellen added poison to her tea. He allowed her to die, knowing that only death could save her from suffering. Statistics say that only 1 out of 10 people with bulimia decide to seek medical help. This is due to the fact that most often patients are not aware of the problem. However, even if they understand that they are not healthy, they are afraid to admit it. It is very difficult to identify a bulimic from the outside. They absorb food only in complete solitude and carry out their ritual of purification in a hidden place. As a rule, bulimia patients' body weight remains normal because part of what they eat still enters the body. In most cases, it is possible to identify a person suffering from bulimia only by the complications that the disorder entails. One of the first signs is a severe psycho-emotional state, which provokes frequent depressive periods. Besides, bulimics often have serious dental problems. Acid passing through the mouth as a result of frequent vomiting causes acid erosion, mainly on the back of the teeth. As a result, the tooth enamel degrades, even despite the strict observance of oral hygiene. Ulcers appear in the oral cavity. The gums become inflamed. Lack of nutrients also affects the condition of the hair and over time leads to hair loss. The skin becomes very dry. Over time, problems arise from the cardiovascular system. Blood pressure decreases and anemia develops. If vomiting is too active, an esophageal wall may burst. In this case, the person begins to vomit blood. With a long-term illness, diseases of the gastrointestinal tract develop, kidney failure occurs, and there is a risk of type 2 diabetes. Bulimia also affects the reproductive function of women. Menstrual irregularities occur. Bulimia during pregnancy can lead to the development of congenital pathologies of the fetus or its death. If a woman manages to recover from bulimia, the ability to conceive and bear children may not be restored. American pop singer and ex-vocalist of the Pussycat Dolls, Nicole Scherzinger, calls bulimia her addiction. According to the singer, no one knew about her illness, and the girl herself hid the disease as she was ashamed of it. Now, Scherzinger realizes that by hiding the problem, she hurt herself. It is such a horrible, paralyzing disease that robs you of living your life. I felt terribly alone, but it was my own fault. You've got to fight bulimia, and in no case isolate yourself from the rest of the world, Nicole said. Bulimia nervosa is a mental disorder characterized by obsessions. A person experiences an almost irresistible desire to eat as much food as possible, then get rid of what he or she has eaten in any way, and at the same time have a slender figure. The patient loses the sense of proportion. This is manifested in a sharp refusal of food, and then a sudden return to a normal lifestyle or daily visits to the gym. Today, no one can answer exactly why such an obsession with aspirations arises. However, there are several theories about the development of this disorder. Many doctors agree that girls are under excessive pressure from society. This reason is considered the main one. A fairly large number of scientists see as a direct relationship between modern beauty standards and eating disorders. Although there are those who refute this theory. As one of the arguments, data are given on the prevalence of bulimia nervosa in Japan, where most girls are inferior in mass, even to the famous model Twiggy when she was at the peak of her fame. However, today about 2% of Japanese women suffer from bulimia. Another reason for the disease's progress is mental disorders. Very often, bulimia occurs against the background of depression, an inferiority complex, and other psycho-emotional pathologies. Physicians also do not deny genetic predisposition. If one of the relatives is overweight, then the child may begin to develop a complex about this. In such families, the risk of bulimia nervosa progression is very high. This theory is refuted by the research involving twins. If one of them has bulimia, the probability of the disorder developing in the second is up to 80%. But this is possible only if the children were brought up in the same family. As soon as they are separated, the likelihood of the disease is sharply reduced. A certain role is also played by disturbances in the function of the cerebral cortex area, responsible for eating behavior. Failure in the production of serotonin also increases the likelihood of developing bulimia. Estrogen plays an important role in women's appetite. Patients with hyperandrogenism tend to develop bulimia several times higher than women with a normal endocrine profile. Bulimia nervosa is often compared to drug addiction. The bulimic is almost addicted to food. Dopamine produced in the brain leads to the fact that a person can no longer experience the pleasure of small amounts of food. There is another theory of the occurrence of bouts of severe hunger. Vomiting, artificially induced by the sick, leads to the fact that the body begins to lack nutrients. The feeling of intense hunger is nothing more than an attempt by the body to correct the situation. Treatment of bulimia nervosa always begins with a search for the causes that resulted in the development of the disorder. The patient can recover only after their amelioration. Elton John was also among the people suffering from bulimia. As a performer said, he's been denying the issue for 15 years, but in 1990, it's gone too far, and the singer decided to be treated. Later, Elton John admitted that the most difficult thing in the treatment was saying the words, "I need help." According to John, the tragic story of Princess Diana, who also suffered from bulimia, helped him tune into treatment. When bulimia was included in the list of diseases, no one singled out the differences in its course all that much. But thanks to the work of a large number of researchers, today there is a classification of types of bulimia according to various criteria. For example, there is transient bulimia, when the patient begins to copy the behavior of other girls. There is also bulimia nervosa combined with depression. Separately, bulimia is also distinguished as a way of obtaining emotional pleasure, and the patient can receive pleasure both from overeating and from the process of inducing vomiting. Analysis of binge eating attacks allowed scientists to identify several more types of this disorder. The obsessive type of bulimia involves a person resisting the forbidden desire to eat for quite a long time. The dysthemic type of bulimia is characterized by binge eating attacks, which are a reaction to emotional experiences. In this case, the internal struggle does not last long. If the patient hardly resists morbid hunger, then we can talk about the impulsive type of bulimia. There are also different ways of cleansing the body. Most often, patients induce vomiting, but they can also take laxatives and diuretics or torture themselves every day for several hours in the gym. The vomiting behavior of patients can also be different. According to this criterion, two types of bulimia are distinguished. In the first case, vomiting causes strong emotions comparable to sexual pleasure. The second type of bulimia nervosa is characterized by vomiting as a ritual to get rid of anxiety about gaining extra pounds and reduce feelings of guilt. Using these classifications, specialists can specify the type of disorder in each individual case. Treatment of bulimia nervosa largely depends on what is the trigger of the pathology, the features of its course, and the psycho-emotional state of the patient. American actress and singer Demi Lovato admitted the disease to her subscribers on the social network. The girl posted before and after photos, sharing her story. According to Lovato, for a long time she tried to cope with drug addiction, against which she began to develop bulimia nervosa. The first picture shows a thin, emaciated, sickly girl. On the second, the same girl after treatment. "I don't feel comfortable looking back. That person is not me. I'm ashamed of myself," Demi says. "I confess I was afraid of losing everything I had. I did not want my friends, family, and colleagues to turn their backs on me, which they were ready to do. I hope no one goes through the difficult path that I had to go through." First of all, you need to understand that coping with bulimia on your own is next to impossible. Treatment of this disorder should be carried out in a complex manner under the supervision of a psychotherapist, gastroenterologist, nutritionist, and doctors of other specializations. A full course of treatment can last about 2 years, but even after that, there is a high chance of recurrence. Diagnosis can take up to 2 weeks. During this time, the doctor must gain a more complete picture of the disease, assess the patient's physical and psychological condition, and exclude organic brain damage or other psychological disorders. Treatment of bulimia nervosa is carried out in several directions at once. Psychotherapy, aimed at restoring peace of mind, is mandatory. Overeating attacks often occur against the background of personal conflicts after experiencing stress as a result of depression. The psychotherapist helps the patient to identify the causes of bulimia, and then they get rid of them through combined efforts. Special attention is paid to the formation of reasonable self-esteem, because it is often deflated in bulimics. It is also extremely important to repair intrafamilial relations, because many psychological issues are formed under the influence of an unfavorable situation in the family. With the help of doctors, patients develop the right attitude to food and normalize their diet. Diets are contraindicated for bulimics. A person should understand that food is necessary for the body to recover energy reserves. Bulimia is treated with antidepressants. These tools improve therapeutic compliance. The patient's mood rises significantly. Fears and high anxiety disappear. Against this background, work is underway to alleviate the complications that bulimia has led to. If the patient's condition is critical, then a decision can be made on compulsory hospitalization. On June 2nd, for the past 6 years, World Eating Disorders Action Day has been held annually around the world. On this day, organizations and activists from around the world come together to debunk myths about eating disorders, raise public awareness about this problem, and advocate for appropriate reforms and organization of assistance to victims of the disease. As writer and activist June Alexander said, "In the first place, eating disorders isolate you from society. I know what I'm talking about. I have been bound hand and foot myself for over 40 years. I know how important it is to break free. I know how important it is for patients to have the opportunity to express themselves, to share their experiences. I want all those who are currently fighting this terrible disease to know that they are not alone. I want them to have the opportunity to get professional help so that they can defeat this terrible disease as I once was able to do. That's why I support World Eating Disorders Action Day. Sincerely yours, Dr. Popmed."